and now this iteration. And, I think for
The stage lights burned bright that night. Cameras flashed, fans screamed, and Jennifer Lopez stood at the center of it all, radiant, powerful, untouchable. But behind the curtain, in the quiet space before the spotlight, there was an absence. No mother cheering backstage, no father waiting with flowers, just silence. Many thought she had it all: beauty, fame, power. Yet very few noticed what was missing. The simple unity of a family that once stood together, now scattered across different cities, different emotions, different regrets. In a rare interview, Jennifer once paused, voice softening, and said, "You work so hard not to let your parents down, but sometimes in the middle of chasing dreams, you realize you've lost more than you gained." Tonight, we step into that silence. We journey not just through the life of Jennifer Lopez, the global superstar, but into the emotional fracture that shaped her. What happened to the parents who raised Jenny from the block? And why does success sometimes leave a family behind? Jennifer Lynn Lopez was born on July 24, 1969, in the Castle Hill neighborhood of the Bronx, New York City. To the world, she is J.Lo, a name that echoes across music charts, box offices, fashion runways, and business empires. But to those who grew up with her, she was simply Jenny, a spirited girl with restless feet and a fierce determination that didn't quite fit the world she was born into. From a young age, Jennifer stood out. In a household of 3 sisters, she was the one who couldn't stop moving. Dance was her first language. As a little girl, she'd push furniture aside in the living room just to practice pirouettes. Her mother, Guadalupe, enrolled her in dance lessons while still in elementary school. Not because they could afford it, but because she knew her daughter had something she couldn't name, only feel. Lopez attended Catholic schools, stayed out of trouble, and followed the rules, until her ambition started to stretch beyond the classroom walls. At 18, she defied her parents' expectations and moved out to pursue dance full-time. She worked nights at law offices, slept in dance studios, auditioned during the day, and took every gig she could find, from backup dancer to small TV parts. Then came the explosion. Her breakthrough performance in Selena 1997 transformed her into the highest-paid Latina actress in Hollywood history at the time. Not long after, she lit up the music industry with her debut album On the Six, a tribute to the subway line she rode as a kid. From there, her empire only grew. Chart-topping singles, headlining tours, clothing lines, fragrance empires, real estate ventures, and an influence that transcended pop culture. Yet Jennifer never tried to erase her origins. Instead, she embraced them. Her Bronx accent, her Puerto Rican roots, the stories of growing up in a working-class home, they were woven into every performance, every interview, every lyric. She wasn't just making it for herself, she was rewriting what was possible for young Latinas in America. Still, fame came with its price. Behind the carefully curated image was a woman who carried guilt, the weight of being the one who made it, while leaving behind the people who made her. The higher she climbed, the more distant certain parts of her life became. She once said, "I've always worked to make my parents proud, but sometimes you wonder if, in doing that, you lost something you'll never get back." Jennifer Lopez's story is one of triumph, yes, but also one of quiet heartbreak, of a daughter who became a global icon, but whose roots were once shaken by choices that made the world love her and her family ache. Jennifer's parents were not famous. They didn't walk red carpets or grace magazine covers, but in many ways, they were the quiet architects of her ambition, shaping her character not with words, but with sacrifice. Her mother, Guadalupe Rodriguez, was born in Ponce, Puerto Rico, and moved to New York with her family as a child. In a new land with unfamiliar language and customs, Guadalupe learned early that survival meant adaptation. She married David Lopez in 1966, a fellow Puerto Rican who had just returned from serving in the military. They settled into a modest home in the Bronx and raised 3 daughters, Leslie, Jennifer, and Linda. Guadalupe was spirited, sharp, and determined. At various times, she worked as a Tupperware salesperson, a kindergarten teacher, and a homemaker, juggling whatever roles necessary to support her girls. She was the kind of mother who demanded respect, punctuality, and perfection. If Jennifer danced at a recital, Guadalupe was the one timing every step, critiquing every gesture, not out of harshness, but from the deep belief that her daughter could be extraordinary. She pushed Jennifer hard, perhaps too hard, but always with love wrapped in urgency. David, in contrast, was quieter. A computer technician at Guardian Insurance, he worked nights and rarely spoke about emotions, but his presence was constant. He'd come home after midnight, peek into his daughter's rooms, and then wake early just to drive them to school. He didn't say, "I love you" often, but when Jennifer needed a ride to rehearsals or a meal after a long night of dancing, he was already waiting by the door. The Lopez household was not one of wealth, but of rhythm. Morning routines, evening prayers, music playing from old stereos, and dinner filled with chatter and reprimands. Religion played a strong role. The girls attended Catholic school, and every Sunday began with Mass before any other plans. But as Jennifer grew older, so did the distance between dreams and expectations. Her decision to forego college and pursue a performing career full-time stunned the family. Guadalupe, in particular, was furious. She had envisioned college, a secure job, maybe a respectable career in law or business, not late nights in clubs, backup dancing, or endless auditions. Jennifer moved out at 18 after a particularly heated argument. She left with barely anything, just a suitcase and an unshakable belief in herself. For a period, she was estranged from her mother. They stopped speaking. Guadalupe felt betrayed, Jennifer felt misunderstood, and in that gap, pain grew, the kind of pain only mothers and daughters can inflict on each other. David, as always, remained in the background, supportive but silent. He didn't interfere, didn't take sides, just quietly hoped the distance would close in time. Years later, Jennifer would say that her drive came from watching her parents work themselves to exhaustion. She confessed, "I couldn't let them down. I saw what they gave up so we could have more." That sense of duty became a kind of obsession, a force that propelled her to keep going, even when she had nothing left to give. But the price was heavy. While Jennifer rose, through films, music, fame, the foundation of her family began to shift. Her parents, once united in raising their daughters, began to drift apart. The long hours, the unspoken resentment, the emotional distance, all culminated in a quiet divorce after 33 years of marriage. Jennifer never spoke much about it. There were no headlines, no press statements, just a soft fracture that never quite healed. A home once filled with music and Sunday rituals now stood divided. And perhaps that's what made her success feel bittersweet. For every award she held, there was an empty chair at the table. For every spotlight, a shadow of what once was. It didn't happen all at once. There was no violent fight, no public scandal, no tearful goodbye captured by the press. The marriage between David Lopez and Guadalupe Rodriguez, two people who had weathered decades of financial hardship, cultural pressure, and parenting 3 daughters, simply unraveled, thread by quiet thread. By the time Jennifer reached global superstardom in the late 1990s, the strain on her family had already begun to surface. Fame, ironically, didn't pull them closer. Instead, it magnified the emotional distance that had quietly grown for years. While the world marveled at Jenny from the block, her parents were grappling with a sense of loss, not only of their marriage, but of the tight-knit family they once built. David, ever the silent figure, had grown increasingly reserved. He kept working, kept showing up, but emotionally, he was fading from the center.
The long hours he'd once spent with his daughters were replaced by quieter nights alone. He rarely spoke about his feelings, but those closest to the family noticed a new kind of silence in him, the kind that comes from watching something you built slowly disappear. Guadalupe, on the other hand, threw herself into Jennifer's orbit, traveling with her, supporting her career, attending events. But even that came at a price. The closeness between mother and daughter was complicated, often intense, and sometimes volatile. There were moments of pride, but also moments when Jennifer felt suffocated, when the pressure to represent not just herself, but her entire culture, her family, her community, weighed too heavily on her shoulders. In interviews, Jennifer has hinted at this tension, saying, "You start out wanting to make your parents proud, and one day you realize you don't know if you're doing this for yourself anymore." It was a quiet confession, but one that spoke volumes. As Jennifer's career soared, the dynamics at home shifted irreversibly. Her two sisters, Leslie and Linda, took different paths. Guadalupe and David, once partners in survival, now barely spoke, unless it was about the children. After 33 years of marriage, they quietly divorced in the late 1990s. There was no major announcement, no media attention, just a legal document and two separate lives. For Jennifer, the news landed like a delayed punch to the chest. She was in the middle of world tours, film premieres, and award shows. She smiled on camera, posed for photos, delivered performances with dazzling precision. But inside, she was reckoning with a profound loss, the end of the only version of home she had ever known. In private, she reflected on how easily things could slip away, how even love, loyalty, and family could fracture under pressure. It wasn't death in the literal sense, but it felt like mourning just the same. A childhood of shared dinners, Catholic rituals, and salsa music echoing through the Bronx apartment. Gone. She never blamed anyone. Not her father, who stayed respectful and distant, not her mother, who remained close but emotionally guarded. But from that point forward, Jennifer Lopez stopped chasing the image of the perfect family. She began building her own version, complicated, independent, but hers. And somewhere in that quiet unraveling, the girl from the Bronx finally understood. Success doesn't just demand sacrifice. Sometimes it demands letting go of the very people who helped you rise.
There was no coffin, no black dress, no flowers placed on velvet. But for Jennifer Lopez, the day her parents' marriage ended was a kind of funeral. Not for a person, but for a vision of family that had once been her anchor. She was in her late 20s, riding the height of fame. Magazine covers, red carpets, #1 singles, all of it spinning so fast she barely had time to breathe. Yet in a quiet moment between tour rehearsals, the news arrived. Her parents had finalized their divorce. No ceremony, no explanation, just a final, silent chapter closed after 33 years. It was surreal. Jennifer had grown up with the image of a tight, traditional Puerto Rican household. Loud dinners, dancing in the kitchen, her father falling asleep in the recliner after long shifts, her mother fussing over homework and laundry. That house in the Bronx had always felt like a fortress. Modest, maybe, but indestructible. And now, gone. She didn't cry in public. She didn't make statements. But in her performances, something shifted. The smile was still there, the fire still burned, but if you looked closely, the sparkle in her eyes had a shadow behind it. A kind of resignation, a kind of goodbye. In an interview years later, she spoke quietly about that time. It's strange to be so seen by the world and yet feel so invisible at home. It wasn't anger she felt, it was grief. Grief for a version of life that would never return. The symbolic farewell came one evening during a sold-out show in New York. Among thousands of screaming fans, Jennifer looked toward the VIP section, a space once reserved for her biggest supporters.
Her mother was there, as always, beaming, but the seat beside her father sat empty. David Lopez had grown increasingly private in the years after the divorce. He supported Jennifer from afar, rarely making appearances. That night, he had declined to attend. No statement, no offense, just silence. And for Jennifer, that empty chair was louder than any applause. She performed anyway, danced fiercely, sang every note. But before the final encore, she paused. The stage lights dimmed, the arena fell into a hush. Then she whispered into the mic. "This one's for the people we love, even when they're not in the room." Most fans thought it was a general dedication, but to her, it was something more. A prayer, a farewell, a silent tribute to the father she no longer saw as often, to the family dinners that wouldn't return, to the version of herself who once believed love always stayed. Later that night, she sat backstage alone. Still in costume, makeup smudged from sweat and emotion. No one saw her wipe the single tear that slipped down. She wasn't mourning fame, she was mourning her roots, how they had quietly unraveled while the world watched her rise. It was a farewell without a casket, a funeral without flowers, but it was real. And sometimes, those are the hardest goodbyes.
In the years that followed, Jennifer Lopez didn't fall apart. She doubled down. The end of her parents' marriage didn't break her. It refined her, hardened her, made her sharper. But beneath the glitter of ambition, a quiet ache remained. The separation didn't bring scandal or screaming fights, but it left questions. Had her success pulled the family apart? Had chasing dreams meant leaving something sacred behind? In the silence between interviews and stadium roars, she wondered. At first, she did what she had always done, work harder. She threw herself into projects, films, music, business ventures. Every move was bigger, more precise, more commanding. She became a brand, an empire. But she also became more guarded. Fewer people entered her inner circle. Fewer truths were shared. She kept her pain private, but it echoed in her art. In I'm Real, she insisted she was still Jenny from the block, still grounded. In Emmy's Lullaby, a soft song written for her daughter, you could hear something else, a quiet vow that her own children would grow up knowing peace, not distance. It was through motherhood that she began to understand her parents, the impossible balance of giving everything and still feeling like it's not enough. When Jennifer gave birth to twins in 2008, something shifted. She softened. She reached out more. She reconnected with her mother, Guadalupe, in a new way as two women who now understood each other through the lens of parenting. Her relationship with David, her father, remained more distant. He was proud, supportive, but preferred the shadows. Jennifer never forced closeness. She honored his choice and quietly sent love in every achievement. In a documentary years later, she admitted, "I've spent my life trying to make people proud. But at some point, you have to ask, am I proud of myself?" It was a rare crack in her armor, a reflection born from years of emotional weight. And yet, through it all, she never lost her core. That fierce girl from the Bronx, molded by sacrifice, shaped by discipline, driven by the fear of letting people down, she was still there. Only now she carried not just the dreams of her parents, but the weight of their silence. Jennifer Lopez didn't break. She evolved. And in that evolution, she found a different kind of love. Quieter, wiser, more forgiving.
In the spotlight, Jennifer Lopez shines, fierce, flawless, commanding every stage she steps on. But behind that brilliance lies a quieter truth. Every light casts a shadow. Her journey isn't just a tale of fame, It's a story of love, of a daughter molded by two working-class parents who gave her everything they had, even when it cost them their own bond. It's the story of a family shaped by sacrifice, then slowly undone by silence. And yet, from that unraveling, Jennifer found her own voice, not just the one that sings or performs, but the one that forgives, reflects, and grows. She didn't just carry her parents' dreams, she carried their pain. She turned both into power. Because sometimes the most lasting legacies aren't in what families preserve, but in what they survive. Jennifer Lopez reminds us that success doesn't always come wrapped in joy. Sometimes it's lined with loss. And you, have you ever risen so high that you looked down and realized something precious was no longer there? If Jennifer's story touched you, don't forget to leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe to the channel for more untold truths about fame.